He didn't ask about my work. He didn't ask about the quarterly numbers. He didn't even offer me a seat. He looked at me across that polished mahogany desk, folded his hands, and said, "Margaret, I need your kidney." Let that sink in. I thought I had misheard him. I'm 67 years old. I've worn hearing aids for 5 years now, and sometimes boardroom acoustics play tricks on me. So I said, politely, because I was raised that way, "I'm sorry?" He leaned forward. His cufflinks gleamed. Gold, custom made. "My daughter is dying," he said. "You're a match. We tested your blood during the company wellness program last year." That was the moment my stomach dropped. Not because of his daughter, but because he had already checked. He had already decided, and he was telling me, not asking. I had worked for that man for 22 years, 22 birthdays missed, 22 Christmas parties organized, 22 years of staying late while younger employees went home to their families. I was loyal, reliable, invisible, but never once did I imagine I was being evaluated for parts. "I'm sorry to hear about your daughter," I managed, "but I don't think I can do that." His face changed. The sympathy evaporated. "I thought you were a team player, Margaret." Team player? I nearly laughed. When my husband died of a heart attack 10 years ago, I was back at my desk in 3 days. 3 days, because this company needed continuity. When my arthritis flared so badly I couldn't button my blouse, I still typed 70 words a minute. When younger staff rolled their eyes at my old-school methods, I trained them anyway. Team player. And now he wanted my kidney. For free? Because I was convenient. "Sir," I said carefully, "organ donation is a serious surgery. At my age—" "You're healthy. The tests say so." The tests. The ones I thought were routine. The ones HR insisted were voluntary but encouraged. My hands started to shake. "I'm not comfortable with this," I said. Silence filled the room. Heavy, thick, calculated. Then he said it. "If you cared about this company, if you cared about me, you'd at least consider it." There it was, the guilt, the manipulation, the power. I thought about my small apartment, my pension barely enough, my savings already dented from medical bills. I wasn't rich. I didn't have children to lean on. My son. Well, that's another story. This job was my stability, and he knew it. "I need time," I whispered. His jaw tightened. "You have until Monday." It was Thursday. 3 days to decide whether I would give up an organ or possibly my livelihood. That weekend, I didn't sleep. I sat in my kitchen with a cup of tea that went cold over and over again. I kept picturing a hospital bed, bright lights, tubes, pain. At 67, recovery isn't quick. It's not easy. And what if something went wrong? Would he pay for lifelong complications? Would he support me if I couldn't work? Or would I simply become disposable? I called my doctor. She was quiet for a long time after I explained. "Margaret, you have mild hypertension. Surgery at your age carries significant risk. You are not obligated to do this." Not obligated. But my job, my health insurance, my dignity. Monday morning came too fast. I walked into his office. He didn't ask how my weekend was. He simply said, "Well?" And for the first time in 22 years, I chose myself. I can't do it. 3 words, simple, firm, final. His expression hardened like stone. "You're disappointed," he said. Then he opened a folder. "I've also reviewed your recent performance metrics. There have been concerns." Concerns? My heart began to pound. "You've struggled with adapting to new systems. Younger staff have reported inefficiencies." I felt like I'd been slapped. "I trained those systems," I said. He didn't blink. "Unfortunately, we need to move in a more dynamic direction." Dynamic, a word that meant younger, cheaper, replaceable. "So, that's it?" My voice cracked despite my effort to stay composed. He folded his hands again. "We're eliminating your position, effective immediately." The room spun. 22 years. Gone. Because I said no. Not officially, of course. On paper, it would look like restructuring. But we both knew. I stood up slowly. "I gave this company my best years." He didn't respond. And as I walked out of that office carrying a cardboard box with my framed photos and my arthritis cream in it, I realized something chilling. He never seen me as a person, only as a resource. And now that I refused to be harvested, I was useless. But here's the part he didn't expect. When I got home that afternoon, there was a letter waiting in my mailbox. Certified mail. From a law firm. And it had her daughter's name on it. The envelope was thick. Official. The kind that makes your fingers tremble before you even open it. I stood in my narrow hallway for a long moment, staring at my name typed neatly across the front. My full name. Not Margaret, not Maggie, not Miss Ellis. Margaret Ann Ellis. The return address was a law firm downtown, the expensive kind. The kind my former boss probably used for contracts and quiet settlements. And beneath that, in smaller print, was his daughter's name, Emily Harper. My chest tightened. Why would his daughter's name be on legal documents addressed to me? Unless... No, surely not. I sat at the small kitchen table where I had spent the weekend wrestling with guilt and fear. I slid a butter knife under the flap and opened it carefully. Inside were several pages. The first line made my vision blur. Notice of intended civil action. Civil action? Against me? My hands started shaking so badly I had to place them flat on the table. The letter claimed that I had been uncooperative during a medical pre-screening process, and that my refusal to proceed with organ donation had caused emotional distress to Emily Harper and her family. Emotional distress? I let out a small, disbelieving laugh. They were threatening to sue me for saying no. The letter went on to suggest that my withdrawal from preliminary compatibility discussions had been irresponsible and had given false hope. False hope? I never volunteered. I was summoned. The paper blurred again as tears stung my eyes, not from sadness, from fury. At 67 years old, after losing my husband, after giving 2 decades to a company, after surviving layoffs, arthritis, and the slow ache of aging alone, I was being painted as a villain because I wouldn't hand over an organ. I pushed the papers away and stood up, pacing the kitchen. My heart pounded louder with every step. This wasn't grief. This was retaliation, and it was coordinated. He fired me in the morning. The letter arrived that afternoon. That wasn't coincidence. That was strategy. I picked up the phone and called the law firm number printed at the top. A receptionist answered, calm and polished. "I received a letter regarding a civil action," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'd like clarification." There was a pause. Then she transferred me. The lawyer who answered spoke in the same detached tone my boss had used in his office. "Miss Ellis," he said, "our client feels misled. You participated in a wellness screening that included organ compatibility metrics. Your initial openness created expectations." "I never agreed to donate," I said sharply. "You did not explicitly refuse at that time." I felt heat rise in my chest. It was a routine company health screening. No one told me I was being evaluated as a donor for my employer's child. Silence. Then, carefully, "These matters can become public. Litigation can be stressful, particularly for someone recently unemployed." There it was, the threat beneath the words. Public, unemployed, vulnerable. I gripped the edge of the counter. "Are you suggesting I owe them a kidney?" "I'm suggesting," he replied smoothly, "that cooperation could prevent unpleasant proceedings." My knees nearly gave out. This wasn't desperation. This was coercion. I hung up before he could say another word. For the first time since my husband's funeral, I felt something awaken inside me that I hadn't felt in years. Not fear, not sadness. Anger. Righteous, burning anger. They thought I was weak. Older women are supposed to be compliant, grateful, quiet. We're supposed to fade politely into the background. They underestimated me. I took the letter, placed it back in the envelope, and walked into the bedroom where my late husband's photograph sat on the dresser. "Tom, what would you tell me to do?" In my mind, I could almost hear his voice. Fight. He always hated bullies. And this was bullying wrapped in expensive paper. I sat on the edge of the bed and began thinking clearly for the first time since Thursday. If they were threatening me legally, that meant they were worried. Why worry unless there was something to hide? The wellness screenings, the blood tests, the data. Did other employees know their compatibility information had been accessed? Had HR disclosed how that information would be used? I replayed last year's mandatory but voluntary wellness fair in my mind. We were ushered into conference rooms in small groups. Forms were handed out quickly. Most of us signed without reading every line. There was coffee and branded tote bags and cheerful HR assistants assuring us it was just for insurance incentives. No one mentioned organ matching. No one mentioned private family medical needs. And suddenly, the situation shifted in my mind. This wasn't about generosity. It was about misuse of power, of data, of trust. I walked back into the kitchen and pulled out my old filing cabinet. I kept everything: old performance reviews, insurance paperwork, company memos. And there it was, the consent form from the wellness program. I adjusted my glasses and began reading every word. Halfway down page 3, in small print, was a clause. Health data may be shared with affiliated entities for wellness-related initiatives. Affiliated entities. That vague phrase could mean anything. But did it include a CEO's private family? My pulse quickened. This wasn't just personal anymore. This could be illegal. And if it was, then maybe I wasn't the one who should be afraid. I picked up my phone again. This time, I didn't call their lawyer. I called someone else, someone I hadn't spoken to in years. My niece, Laura, a civil rights attorney. And when she answered, I said just 4 words. I think they crossed a line. There was a long pause. Then she said quietly, "Aunt Margaret, tell me everything." Laura didn't interrupt me once. Not when my voice trembled, not when I paused to swallow back tears, not even when I admitted how small and frightened I had felt sitting across that mahogany desk. She listened the way good lawyers do, carefully, clinically, but beneath that, I could hear something else. Anger. When I finished, there was silence on the line for several seconds. Then she exhaled slowly. "Aunt Margaret, this is serious." "I thought so," I whispered. "No," she corrected gently. "It's worse than you think." I sat straighter in my kitchen chair. "The wellness screenings," she continued, "are governed by strict federal laws. Medical data collected by employers, especially through third-party programs, has protections. They cannot access individual results without explicit consent, and they certainly cannot use that data for personal reasons. So he couldn't have known I was a match? Not legally." The word echoed in my chest. Not legally. "And the pressure?" she asked. "Did he imply your job depended on it?" I closed my eyes and replayed the moment. "I thought you were a team player. Effective immediately." "Yes," I said quietly. "He did." Another long pause. "That's coercion and potentially wrongful termination." Wrongful termination. The phrase sounded almost foreign to me. I had never sued anyone, never challenged authority. I was raised in a generation that kept our heads down and worked hard. But something had shifted. They sent a letter threatening to sue me for emotional distress. There was a sharp inhale on the other end. They did what? I repeated the details, the wording, the tone. Laura's voice changed after that, sharper, focused. "That's intimidation. It's meant to scare you into compliance." "It worked," I admitted softly. "But you didn't comply." "No." "And that," she said firmly, "is where they made a mistake." The next morning, Laura drove 3 hours to my apartment. When I opened the door, she hugged me tightly. She's in her early 40s now, confident, intelligent, the kind of woman who walks into a room and shifts its energy. "You look exhausted," she said gently. "I haven't slept much. We'll fix that." She spread the documents across my kitchen table like pieces of a puzzle. The termination paperwork, the threatening letter, the wellness consent form. She read every line twice. Then she leaned back in her chair. There, exposed. Exposed? I repeated. If we can prove he accessed your medical compatibility data without proper authorization, that's a violation. If he tied your employment to organ donation, that's retaliation. If the law firm sent that letter knowing you never consented, that's further misconduct. I felt something unfamiliar flicker inside me. Hope. But he's powerful, I said quietly. He owns half the city. Laura smiled slightly. So did a lot of men who thought they were untouchable. Her confidence steadied me. For now, she continued, we do nothing publicly. We gather information. From who? From the company. My stomach tightened. I don't work there anymore. You don't need to. She explained the next step carefully. We would send a formal legal notice requesting documentation, who accessed my medical data, when it was accessed, and for what purpose. We would demand internal communications regarding my termination. We would subpoena the third-party wellness provider if necessary. They'll panic, she said calmly, because if they did this to you, they may have done it to others. Others. The word hit me hard. How many employees had been tested without fully understanding? How many older workers had been quietly pushed aside? How many had stayed silent? Laura reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Aunt Margaret, this isn't just about a kidney. It's about abuse of power. 2 days later, the letter was sent, certified, directly to the company's legal department. And then we waited. Waiting is its own kind of torture. I kept imagining him opening the envelope, his confident expression faltering, his legal team scrambling. 3 days passed. Then my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered cautiously. Margaret, he said. My former boss. His voice no longer smooth and commanding. It sounded strained. You've involved a lawyer. Yes, I replied evenly. You could have handled this privately. You tried that. Silence. You're making a mistake, he said. This could get messy. It already is. Another pause. My daughter is dying, he said again, softer this time. And for a moment, just a moment, my heart wavered. But then I remembered the termination letter, the threat, the intimidation. I'm sorry for your daughter, I said carefully, but you don't get to sacrifice me to save her. His breathing sharpened. You think you can win this? I surprised myself with my answer. I think the truth matters. He hung up. My hands trembled after the call, not from fear, from adrenaline. That evening, Laura called again. They responded. And they're refusing to provide the documentation voluntarily. My stomach dropped. But, she added, they offered a settlement. Settlement. The word felt heavy. How much? I asked. She hesitated. Enough to cover your retirement comfortably. The room went very quiet. After 22 years of loyalty, after humiliation, after fear, now they wanted to pay me to disappear. Laura's voice softened. We don't have to accept, but it's substantial. I stared at the photograph of my husband on the wall. A comfortable retirement, no financial stress, peace. But at what cost? If I accepted, they would never be exposed. Other employees would never know, and he would learn nothing. Laura spoke again. There's more. My heart thudded. The settlement includes a non-disclosure agreement and a clause stating you voluntarily resigned. Voluntarily resigned. The lie nearly took my breath away. They didn't just want silence, they wanted to rewrite history. And as I sat there in my quiet apartment, staring at that offer, I realized this decision would define the rest of my life. I didn't answer Laura right away. I stood by the kitchen window and watched a neighbor walking her little dog. Ordinary life, ordinary peace. The kind of peace money could buy. "Aunt Margaret?" Laura prompted gently. "If I sign," I said slowly, "it's over?" "Yes. They wire the settlement. You sign the non-disclosure. You agree not to pursue claims. They classify your departure as voluntary. Clean break." Clean. Such a polite word for burying the truth. "And if I don't sign?" "We file." File. One small word that meant headlines, depositions, courtrooms, public scrutiny. At 67 years old, I hadn't imagined my retirement would involve litigation against a multi-millionaire CEO. "I'm tired, Laura," I admitted. "I know. I don't know if I have the strength for a war." There was a pause on the line. "Then don't think of it as a war," she said softly. "Think of it as a boundary." That word settled into me. Boundary. For 22 years, I had none. Late nights, unpaid overtime, emotional manipulation disguised as loyalty, and now my body itself had been treated like company property. I turned back to the table and looked at the settlement packet Laura had emailed me. The number was staggering. More money than I had ever had in my account at one time. Enough to replace my aging car. Enough to fix my knees. Enough to travel. Enough to finally breathe without calculating every grocery bill. But the clause at the bottom glared at me. Employee acknowledges voluntary resignation and denies any wrongdoing by employer. Denies any wrongdoing. I felt something harden in my chest. I didn't do anything wrong. I said no. That was my crime. Laura spoke again, her tone careful. "If you choose to fight, it won't be easy. They'll question your memory, your performance, your motives. They may imply age-related decline." The humiliation of that possibility burned. "They'll say I'm confused?" I asked quietly. "They might." I thought about the younger staff who had rolled their eyes at my experience, about the subtle jokes about keeping up with technology, about how easy it would be to paint me as outdated. The narrative was already there. Old employee, struggling, emotional, convenient. I straightened my shoulders. I want them to answer for this. Laura didn't react immediately. Then she said, steady and firm, "Okay." The lawsuit was filed the following week. Wrongful termination, medical privacy violation, retaliation, intentional infliction of emotional distress. The paperwork felt surreal. My name printed as plaintiff, him as defendant. For days after filing, there was silence. No phone calls, no threats, just quiet. The kind of quiet that means strategy is happening behind closed doors. Then it exploded. Local business blogs picked up the filing first, then a regional newspaper. The headline made my hands tremble. CEO accused of pressuring employee for organ donation. The story spread faster than I expected. Reporters called. Former colleagues texted quietly. One message stood out. It was from Daniel, a younger analyst I had trained 5 years ago. I always wondered why they asked about blood types in the screening. You're brave. Brave. I didn't feel brave. I felt exposed. But then something else happened. 2 days after the article published, Laura received another call from a different former employee, a woman named Carol, 70 years old, recently laid off. She had also participated in the wellness screening, and shortly after, she'd been asked unusual questions from HR about her family medical history and willingness to help colleagues in need. My pulse quickened as Laura relayed the conversation. "They're scared," Laura said, "because this may not be isolated." Another call came, then another. Older employees, all quietly pushed out over the last 2 years. All had participated in the same screening program. Not all were matches, but some had been contacted privately for confidential conversations. My stomach turned. This wasn't desperation for one daughter. This was systematic, selective targeting of loyal, older staff. Easier to pressure, easier to replace. Laura's voice carried a new edge. This is becoming a class action possibility. Class action. I had heard the phrase on television, never imagined being part of one. "I never wanted to start a movement," I said faintly. "You didn't. You told the truth." Then came the deposition notice. I would have to sit in a room with his lawyers, answer questions under oath, relive every detail. The night before, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my heart racing like it had the day he fired me. What if I broke down? What if I said the wrong thing? What if they twisted my words? At 3:17 a.m., I got up and walked into the living room. I looked at my husband's photo again. "I'm scared," I whispered. But beneath the fear, there was something else. Resolve. They had assumed I would fold, accept the money, disappear quietly. Instead, the story was spreading, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. The next morning, I put on my navy blue suit, the one I wore to my last company banquet. I adjusted my hearing aids, applied my lipstick, and as I walked into that conference room filled with polished attorneys and expensive watches, he was already there. And when our eyes met, he didn't look confident anymore. He looked worried. The deposition room was colder than it needed to be. Too bright, too white, too calculated. I sat at one end of the polished table, Laura beside me. Across from us were 3 attorneys and a court reporter, and at the far end, him. For 22 years, I had watched him command rooms. Now he avoided my eyes. That alone steadied me. The questioning began politely enough. "Miss Ellis, how long were you employed at the company?" 22 years. "And during that time, did you receive positive performance reviews?" "Yes." Laura had brought copies, every single one. They shifted tactics quickly. "Were you ever counseled about adapting to new technologies?" "I trained staff on the new systems," I replied evenly. A flicker of irritation crossed one attorney's face. They tried memory next. "At your age, Miss Ellis, would you say recall is sometimes difficult?" Laura objected immediately. "Rephrase." The attorney adjusted his glasses. "Do you keep records to help you remember workplace interactions?" "Yes." I said calmly, which is why I have documented emails and dates. I watched his pen pause mid-note. Then came the question we all knew was coming. Did Mr. Harper explicitly state your job depended on donating a kidney? The room felt smaller. He said I had until Monday to decide, and I was terminated the same day I refused. Correlation does not imply causation, the attorney replied. No, I said steadily, but timing tells a story. Laura squeezed my knee under the table. Then they turned to him. He shifted in his chair, clearing his throat. I never pressured Miss Ellis, he said smoothly. I merely asked for consideration during a personal crisis. Personal crisis, as if that excused everything. And the termination? Laura asked. Restructuring. Laura slid a document across the table, an internal memo, dated 2 weeks before my firing. It listed projected layoffs. My name was not on it. His jaw tightened. Another document followed, an email from him to HR the night before my termination. Subject line, immediate adjustment. His words were brief. Proceed tomorrow. The attorney objected, but the damage was visible. He hadn't expected us to have that. He hadn't expected me to fight. The deposition lasted 6 hours. By the end, my throat was dry and my back ached, but I had not broken. When it was over, Laura leaned close and whispered, "You were incredible." I didn't feel incredible. I felt exhausted. But for the first time since this began, I also felt powerful. Outside the building, reporters waited. Flashes, questions shouted into the air. "Miss Ellis, do you regret refusing?" "No," I said clearly. "Do you believe other employees were targeted?" "We'll let the evidence speak." I kept my composure until I reached the car. Then my hands began to shake. Laura drove in silence for a few minutes before speaking. "They're in trouble." "How much trouble?" She hesitated. "The wellness provider is cooperating. They confirmed medical match data was accessed directly by executive request." I stared at her. He requested my compatibility information? Yes. Illegally, without consent, without medical necessity beyond his own family. The final piece fell into place. He hadn't stumbled onto my match. He had searched for it. I felt sick, not because he wanted to save his daughter, but because he was willing to sacrifice anyone to do it. A week later, the offer changed. Not a quiet settlement anymore, a public one, significantly larger, with no admission of voluntary resignation, instead a mutual separation. Laura laid it out carefully. They want this contained, badly. "And the class action?" I asked. "Other employees are joining. The case is expanding." My heart pounded. This had grown beyond me, beyond a single kidney, beyond a single job. This could expose systemic misuse of employee medical data. Corporate governance boards are paying attention. I thought about the younger analysts, the receptionists, the older accountants nearing retirement, people who trusted the system, like I did. The new offer would set me up comfortably for life, but if I accepted now, the larger case might weaken. I walked to the window again. The world outside looked ordinary. Cars passing, a child riding a bicycle. No one would guess that inside my small apartment, decisions were being made that could shake a corporation. "I don't want revenge," I said quietly. "I know. I want acknowledgement." Laura nodded slowly. Then we holed. 2 days later, the breaking point came. The board of directors announced an internal investigation. Then, abruptly, he resigned. Public statement, stepping down to focus on family. Family. The same word he used to pressure me, but this time it wasn't power, it was retreat. News outlets ran the story nationwide, and suddenly strangers were calling me courageous, an advocate, a symbol. I didn't feel any of those things. I felt like a 67-year-old woman who had finally said no. But the legal battle wasn't over. The company still hadn't admitted wrongdoing. The class action was moving forward, and Emily, his daughter, remained critically ill. One evening, as I sat alone with a cup of tea, my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer it, but something told me to pick it up. A young woman's voice spoke softly. "Is this Margaret Ellis?" "Yes." There was a long pause. Then she said, "This is Emily Harper," and her voice was shaking. Her voice was thinner than I expected. Not weak, just tired. "This is Emily Harper." For a moment, I couldn't speak. The daughter, the reason, the center of this storm. "I hope it's okay that I'm calling," she said quickly. "I had to get your number through, well, it doesn't matter." Her breathing was uneven, like someone trying not to cry. "I won't take much of your time." I swallowed. "Go ahead." Silence lingered between us. Then she said something I didn't expect. "I'm sorry." The word landed gently, not defensive, not rehearsed, raw. "I didn't know. I didn't know how he approached you." My fingers tightened around the phone. "He told me you were considering it. He told me you changed your mind suddenly." I closed my eyes. "He made it sound like you'd agreed." There it was, the final manipulation. He hadn't just pressured me, he had used me to comfort his daughter. Hope built on assumption. "I never agreed," I said quietly. "I know that now. After the lawsuit, after everything came out, I saw the emails." Emails? My pulse slowed. "He accessed employee records, not just yours. He asked for a list of potential matches. HR pushed back at first. He overruled them." The confirmation should have felt triumphant. Instead, it felt heavy. "He was desperate, but that doesn't excuse it." No, it didn't. "I don't blame you," she added softly. "You don't owe me your kidney." Her voice cracked on the word owe, and suddenly she wasn't a headline, she wasn't leverage, she was a young woman facing mortality. "How are you?" I asked gently. There was a long pause. "I'm on dialysis," she admitted. "They found another potential donor. We're waiting on final compatibility." Relief flooded me before I could stop it. "I hope it works," I said honestly. "I do too." Silence settled again. Then she said something that changed everything. "My father always wins," she murmured. "He fixes problems with money, influence, control." I said nothing. "But this time," she continued, "he couldn't control the outcome, and instead of accepting that, he tried to force it." Her voice steadied. "I don't want my life saved that way." The words were simple, but they carried more dignity than all his lawyers combined. "I'm sorry you were hurt, truly." And in that moment, something inside me softened, not toward him, but toward her. "You didn't hurt me, he did." We spoke for a few more minutes about dialysis, about fear, about how strange it feels when your body betrays you. Before hanging up, she said one last thing. "I'm glad you stood up to him." After the call ended, I sat in silence. I had expected confrontation. Instead, I received closure. Weeks later, the company settled publicly. No more quiet deals, no non-disclosure about the core facts. The official statement acknowledged improper access to employee medical information and retaliatory termination. They avoided using the word illegal, but the implication was clear. The class action continued, strengthening protections for employee medical privacy. Policies changed, oversight tightened, other older employees received compensation, and as for me, I received a settlement that secured my future, not as hush money, but as recognition. More important than the money was something else. My name was cleared, publicly. No voluntary resignation, no performance deficiency, just the truth. Months later, I visited a small coastal town I had always dreamed of seeing. The ocean stretched endlessly before me. I stood at the shoreline, wind tugging at my gray hair, and thought about how close I had come to disappearing quietly. How easy it would have been to sign, to stay silent, to accept comfort over courage. At 67, society had already decided what I was supposed to be: grateful, compliant, small. Instead, I learned something profound. Age does not reduce your worth. Loyalty does not mean surrender. And kindness does not require self-sacrifice. Saying no saved more than my kidney. It saved my dignity. A final letter arrived months later, handwritten, from Emily. The transplant had been successful. A young man, unrelated, voluntary, had donated. He chose freely, she wrote, and that makes all the difference. I held that letter for a long time. Free choice. That was the point all along. Not obligation, not coercion. Choice. I am not a hero. I am not extraordinary. I am a woman who spent decades being dependable. And one day, when pushed beyond fairness, I chose myself. And that choice changed everything.